Hi everyone, welcome to A Noise Within Fridays at 5. First, I want to invite in Carol Foreman from Rule My World with Signal Hill Sandbox, and Shivani Thacker from Her Story MK and Bali Stars, and Shalini Bathina with Her Story MK and Bali Stars, and Elmira Rahim with Trojan Women and Alana Ensemble. So welcome everyone. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank
Hello.
you.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here with us. So I got some feedback that I may be a little garbled, so maybe my internet connection isn't super great, but I'm going to try and keep the conversation on you and hope that we can keep our audience engaged.
It's actually much better now.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
it's fine now. Yeah.
I think when you were alone, yeah.
Well, I should just never start alone. That's
Never.
In case you didn't hear, my name is Carol, Director of Cultural Programming, and welcome to A Noise Within's Fridays at 5, which is a virtual space we create every couple of weeks to gather with you, our patrons, and our artists. Today, we're going to be meeting with these 4 amazing leaders, artists, talking about specific projects they're working on and presenting with Noise Now that are reimagining different classics for today. Before we go into that, though, I just want to acknowledge that A Noise Within is on the traditional land of the Gabrielino Tongva Nation, and we want to offer our gratitude to the generations of caretakers of that space. I specifically am in San Diego, in Kumeyaay land, and I want to acknowledge that as well. And I'd love to start by having each of our panelists introduce yourself and specifically the project that you are working on with Noise Now. Give us a little bit of background about what that project is. And I wonder, Elmira, if you could start us off.
Sure. My name is Elmira Rahim. I'm the artistic director of Alana Ensemble, and I'm also an actor, and I'm happy to be a part of this project, Trojan Women, which was originally developed at the USC MFA acting program as part of the 3-play rep. And I'm so excited and look forward to share this work with Noise Now audience and LA theater community. And so happy to be here today.
Thank you. Carol, welcome.
Hello, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Carol Foreman. I'm the director of the Signal Hill Sandbox. It's a fiscally sponsored nonprofit of Fractured Atlas, and I started the initiative a little over, I guess, almost 2 years ago. And moving recently to Long Beach, I was looking around and realized I wanted to do more community-based work and collaborate with people about things that were close to my heart, develop projects as well as develop projects with other people in the community. A couple of years ago, I initiated a show that I co-produced with the Children's Theater of Long Beach to teach kids about caring for their animal companions. And Rule My World is a huge 180. It's a modern adaptation of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, and I was inspired by the crack cocaine opioid epidemic. So it speaks to those issues of communities of color being exploited for political and personal gain.
Thank you so much. Shivani and Shalini, welcome.
Hi.
Hi,
I'm Shivani Thacker, and I'm the artistic director of MK and Bali Stars. And this is our 3rd collaboration with the Noise Now program. So we are so grateful to be back. And Shalini is an amazing collaborative partner, and she and I are co-creating the show called Her Story. And Shalini, why don't you talk about Her Story?
Yeah, Her Story is an original work. We're combining Indian classical and obviously classical theater, specifically 2 literary works, one classic of India, which is the Ramayana, and Winter's Tale by Shakespeare, and the titular characters of the female characters specifically, and comparing their journeys. So we'll get into that more once we talk about it. But yeah, Shivani and I have been doing Indian classical dance since we were 5. We've been trained in 2 separate styles, and also doing theater. We went to USC School of Theater, graduated like 10 years apart, but then found each other after I graduated and been working ever since. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reminded that a lot of us are USC.
I know. Jonathan.
Yeah.
Jonathan directed me in a play my senior year of college. So.
Oh, wow.
Great.
And look at us now.
I know.
So as our wonderful audience has heard all of you mention Noise Now. So for those of you who are watching who don't know what Noise Now is, it's an initiative that I've been leading for almost 2 years now. We launched it in February of 2019, and it's sort of a second season of events that could be dance, opera, theater, even art exhibitions that celebrate the classics and expand the classics, really examine world classics, classics through diverse lenses, and are really rooted in EDI being the backbone, equity, diversity, inclusion being the backbone of these artistic choices. Another key component to this is that all of the work that's curated through Noise Now is brought to us and proposed to us by community partners, by our community artists. So we really don't want to be so much curators or gatekeepers. We want to be, we want to share resources and build relationships with our community. So with that, we're going to show you a brief launch video for Noise Now. This was from 2019, so bits of it are a little bit dated, but for those of you who are new to the program, we want to share the same foundation with you. So enjoy.
Noise Now is a new initiative that A Noise Within is launching to increase our commitment to anyone who's not already in the building. So we want to build relationship with communities of color, with younger people, with queer communities, and use theater, use performing arts as a way to activate and express the voices of all of our neighbors. So essentially we want to be better neighbors. And even though we've been doing great work for decades, we want to now empower other communities and our neighbors to tell stories with us and to get their voices on our stage. The way we're reaching out to the community and the way that we're getting Noise Now on its feet is by going to the communities we want a relationship with, going to communities of color and saying with openness and vulnerability, we want a relationship with you. We're really excited to know more about who you are and what storytelling means to you and what you would want on stage. And one at a time, one person, one organization, one community at a time, we are doing a lot of listening. I'm doing a listening tour. Right now I've reached out to about 300 organizations in Los Angeles, and at least 50 of them have sat down with me already, and I asked them, what would a relationship look like for you? How can we be of service? And therefore, instead of looking for culturally specific projects to then present and put on our stage and expect those cultures to come see that work at A Noise Within, instead of that, the ideas for what will happen in Noise Now are being generated by our community. So the community has stake, and they're saying, we want this, we need this. If you do this with us, Noise Now, we'll be there. In this first year especially, A Noise Within is empowering me and Noise Now to be experimental, to be exploratory, to risk courageously. And what that means is, while A Noise Within's mission isn't changing, we are committed to telling classical stories through theater. Noise Now events may not be theater and may not even be classical stories. A Noise Now event could be dance, contemporary theater, a new play, music, art installation, concert. We're looking at all types of performance and art and storytelling as a way to engage new audiences and communities who are new to this building and to A Noise Within. In addition to exploring different types of performance, we're exploring performance in different spaces. So Noise Now is an opportunity to activate our lobby space, our front lawn, non-traditional spaces around our campus, including our rehearsal hall, perhaps even our office space and conference room. So Noise Now opens up the possibility for site-specific theater, moving performance, immersive performance, and really exploring storytelling and performance through non-traditional ways.
All right, so that's what we've been working on for about a year and a half, and now the journey moves forward with the four of you. So I want to start with you, Carol, and learn a little bit more about Rule My World, and specifically, I'm so interested in your choice to use music and opera as a way of telling the story, because a lot of the Noise Now projects are theater, and some are dance. We don't have much music, so I'd love to hear about your journey and choice there.
Wow. Where to start? Well, the impulse for the project came when I was one of the resident artists at Oregon Shakespeare Festival in this is a long time ago, y'all, about 1995, 96. And I had just received word that my aunt, who basically raised my mother, who was one of the few relatives we knew, had died. And then we were shocked to discover that she was addicted to crack cocaine. Which was a huge shock because at the time, everything we were seeing in the media was that, this epidemic was only affecting really poor Black communities, mostly criminals. There was just this really propaganda that these were people who were beyond redemption. They were super criminals, super predators, whatever labeling was coming out at the time. And, this was my aunt Helen. She was kind of an old hippie, but, she middle class working, it didn't compute. I was also reading Anthony and Cleopatra at the time, and my neighbor had given me Mary J. Blige's CD at the time, What's the 411? And I think I was just kind of grieving in my own way and having a good glass of wine, and her music was in the background, and I opened up Anthony and Cleopatra, and something that leapt out at me was, if it be love indeed, tell me how much, and there must needs be a new heaven and a new earth I'm badly paraphrasing, basically that Anthony answers Cleopatra, and I'm thinking, these people are really effed up. This love affair is so excessive and so big, and it felt like an addictive, codependent relationship. And I don't know, I just started to make connections the more I was reading, and I was picking up on a lot of chemical substances. Give me mandrake to sleep that I may waste around, wine to drink. They were talking about partying and excess, and then, but also the political alliances of Rome and them as a colonizing people going into Egypt at the time, where you have this woman of great power, but they needed her resources. And then I also read the San Jose Mercury News about the Iran-Contra scandal, as well as the government CIA involvement in their accusation was that the government was actually sending cocaine into Black and brown neighborhoods to get people addicted so they could pay for their mercenary armies in South America. So I don't know, somehow my brain kind of worked that out. Does that make sense? Was that a little too circuitous of a description?
No.
But
No, not at all. Thank you. Yeah,
that was the impetus. And also because of Shakespeare's musicality. I was introduced to Shakespeare when I was 13, 14, 15, growing up not thinking that someone like me was invited into this institution of Western classical theater. Certainly not Shakespeare, because I didn't understand it. But then a man by the name of Eric Christmas, who was kind of the darling of the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, I got cast as Puck in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. The Old Globe Theater was doing a summer youth training program, and suddenly the light bulb went off, and I loved the rhythm, I loved the music of it, I loved the language of it and the poetry. I was just so excited by it, and I felt like he gave me an invitation into this world. So when I'm reading Shakespeare, it's like a musical score to me. And the way that also Shakespeare is, he even writes, when we're in Egypt, they speak a certain way. When they're in Rome, it's much more structured and formalized. And towards the end of the play, it all starts to overlap. And then Cleopatra switches and speaks the language of Rome. And I thought that was really interesting, and how traditionally the use of music is figured. So in putting it in a contemporary world, at first people said, oh, you should call this a hip hop opera. But that didn't ring true to me because, first of all, I'm not a hip hop artist. As much as I love rap and R&B and hip hop, I wanted the different communities to have a different musical sound and motif. So Cleopatra's Realm, everyone. It's old school R&B. It's rap. It's hip hop. It's spoken word. In Rome, I have techno trance music, and Antonio, I named Anthony Antonio, and he's a mercenary soldier, so I wanted more of a Latin influence in the musical forms, and that was fun and interesting. So then I had to find a composer who understood opera, classical foundation, and could do all those musical forms. And I found him in Alan Phillips. We went to college together at USIU, and he's an ethnomusicologist. He's from Venezuela. So he grew up as a drummer, but he plays keyboard. But his particular approach to playing the keyboard is very rhythmic. And and he's a great collaborator. I show up at his studio. He goes, okay, how does the song go? And I'm like, you're the composer. So it was kind of the perfect storm, and it felt absolutely appropriate for the world that I wanted this to live in, and to try to have a point of entry for retelling this story with the vision that I had.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, I've heard the music. I've read the play. I cannot wait to see it come to life at A Noise Within. Shivani and Shalini, so you are adapting a Indian classic and merging it with The Winter's Tale. I'd love to hear more about her story, but specifically what it's like to adapt classic through Indian classical dance, and from what I understand, different styles of Indian classical dance. Tell us more about that.
Okay, I'm gonna plunge in. So basically, like Shalini mentioned, we have two different dance style backgrounds. I'm trained in Bharatanatyam, and Shalini's trained. And then we both have also studied theater. And so her story is really a culmination of our experiences and training in these different art forms. So we are combining Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, and sorry, my connection. Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, and theater with spoken word and poetry. Shalini, you can continue.
The idea was that, well, we both were very familiar with the Ramayana, which is an Indian epic drama. It's about the story of Rama and his epic journey through saving his wife Sita, and that's like a very short version of it. It's a very long epic, but the main character, the female lead, is her name is Sita, and she's the queen. And in Winter's Tale, we have Hermione, who's the queen, but they both have a very, very similar parallel story of having to prove themselves innocent, and because they're let me go back. They're accused of adultery, so they have to prove their innocence eventually. The whole story is about that. But we took these specific moments where they're in the court and they're basically having to defend themselves, and we saw those two parallels in both of the stories. There are many versions of the Ramayana throughout our history, but we found one specific one that we saw was a point of view from Sita. So we took that story and Hermione's monologue and have been combining them. But through dance, I think it just seems so natural. I think both of us have done theater, and it's very physical, and we've done like voice and movement and stuff. And then through dance, it was a lot of the main part of Indian classical dance is actually storytelling, which people don't really actually know about. They usually see the pure dance part of it, which is called the Natyam, but the Abhinaya part, which is basically expression, and it's actually based off of the 9 Navarasas, which is the 9 facial expressions and different emotions. So that's actually our foundation for acting has actually come from Indian classical dance. So since we were 5, and then it was almost a natural progression into theater. So combining the two was actually very seamless when we actually think about it. So,
and just to piggyback off of that, so Indian classical dance is traditionally, it's a 2,000-year-old art form, and dance and theater was one art form in India. And so a lot of our components of dance include storytelling and mime and the use of hand gestures, facial expressions, altering our entire body and movement to depict and portray various characters and emotions. Shalini talked about the Navarasa. Navarasa are the 9 basic emotions. So through our dance, we express stories, we tell stories that explore the 9 basic emotions, including sadness, love, and within each of these emotions, like for example, with love, the variations and degrees of love. The love a mother would feel for a child is very different than a woman would feel for her lover versus her husband. You know, they're different shades of love. So we have this amazing, rich background in Indian classical dance that is very harmonious with theater expression. The style that Shalini does is Kuchipudi. I do Bharatanatyam. They're both South Indian classical dance styles. In India, we have 8 classical dance styles. And Kuchipudi and Bharatanatyam are actually very similar. They're sister styles in some sense. So a lot of our vocabulary is very much the same. Some stylistics in terms of how we execute that vocabulary are different. And so a lot of our process has been figuring out moments of adapting to each other's styles and then also staying distinct and playing off of each other's styles.
And staying and authentic as well, because we didn't want to like stray too far and we wanted to stay within the classical form.
Mm-hmm. Our contemporary interpretation in our show is applying our classical dance style to text and to using music that maybe isn't our traditional Bharatanatyam or Kuchipudi music. The music that we've been inspired by is more contemporary music and instrumental music. And so we've sourced, various, we did a lot of research and found different types of music that really inspired us. And then when Shalini mentioned, so the Ramayana, I would say, is almost comparable to any sort of Greek text like the Odyssey. It's a huge poem, a mythic, epic poem. So it's not a play like A Winter's Tale is. And that's sort of been an interesting thing in terms of our adaptation or interpretation is we've been given very structured text from Shakespeare with actual dialogue that Hermione speaks. While in terms of Sita, we don't have dialogue that she speaks. So we have to create that dialogue. And so that's been interesting because in some sense, we have a lot more freedom in adapting the Ramayana because there are so many different interpretations. And at the same time, we have a little bit of more anchor in terms of Winter's Tale because we know what Hermione says and we know what her viewpoint is very clearly.
There's also, sorry, with the Ramayana, there have been many variations, as I said before, not just through songs or dance or even productions. So we actually, for us, we've learned it as more like a fairy tale. So when we grew up with it, it was a moral story. There was always a meaning behind it. And, you know, our parents would reiterate it in a language that was more understandable for us. Like since I was 5, I've been hearing the story every year. So we actually felt safer to modify the text and play with the language and the perspectives and the interpretation. But with the Winter's Tale, it's been a little difficult that way because we've always, you know, the production's always changed, but the text has always been the same. So not to bastardize the language had actually a little bit of a difficulty because not only were we using just the monologue, but to explain the other parts of the story and then interweaving with the Sita story, we needed to have almost a similar dialogue or at least elevated language because we were still interacting. So the idea is that Sita interacts with Hermione and that's kind of the whole story. So we needed our wonderful writer Pallavi Srinivasan. She's fantastic. She's also a USC grad. We've been working closely with her just to navigate. It's been a long process.
Many things I love about her story is that her story is, I don't like the word product, but it's a project that has been birthed out of literally a 2-year relationship between really the 3 of us, between MKM Bali Stars and A Noise Within. And in some ways, it's sort of like the perfect example of what the dream of Noise Now was, because we've done 2 projects already together, and then we got to a point where I just said, "What do you want to do?" well, we see you doing The Winter's Tale on your main stage. What do you think of this idea? And I'm like, it doesn't exist yet, but let's build it. Like, it sounds great. So I think saying yes to artists and opening up our doors and saying yes to a project that I've never even heard of, but you introduced me to this, has been an incredibly eye-opening and inspiring journey for our entire staff. So
and just to respond to that, Jonathan, I don't think even you know this, but it actually, this whole sort of seed and realization of Hermione and Sita having a similar female experience came about when we were working on our first project, Yatri, at Noise Within. I had come into a rehearsal of Shalini and mine at the Noise Within space, and I'd just come from an audition where I was doing Hermione's Winter's Tale as my audition monologue. And it happened to be that at this time I was reading this book of the Ramayana, but from Sita's point of view, and Forest of Enchantments. And I saw that they were saying the same thing. And I was like, how is this possible? And I came in and told Shalini, I was like, so I was saying my monologue and I realized I was speaking what Sita's feeling. And that's when we started this conversation. And we said, well, Sita's story took place hundreds of years ago in India. It has no real connection or relationship to Winter's Tale and Shakespeare's time period. And yet it's a story that we find that is even occurring present day for women. You know, the burden to prove their worth, their innocence, feel that they have a voice that can be trusted on merit, just on their voice, on their word, and the weight of a woman's word, and what the question and definition of a woman's honor is, and why are women defined by being pure and virginal and keeping an honor. And so all these questions came up and we're like, oh, it's so relevant. And it's a timeless story that happens across the world in different cultures to different women. And that's sort of the crux of her story is Sita and Hermione become aware of each other, they meet each other, but then they dissolve into one woman because it's the story of the spirit of the woman, which is her story. In effect.
I love this so much. So much I want to say, but I'm withholding because there's so much to say in this one little meeting. So I want to pivot now to Elmira of Alana Ensemble. Tell us about, speaking of women and powerful women, tell us about Trojan women, and specifically what excites me so much about this mix of you four artists is you're using such radically different languages, whether it be music, dance, improv, movement, whatever it may be. And Elmira, Alana Ensemble has really worked in a very unique physical movement improv language to generate this through Devised theater, I believe. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, this piece was developed at USC, and I was at the time second-year student of MFA acting program, and this was performed by the class of 2014, which they were graduating that year. And I was so inspired by this piece in particular that really sort of encouraged me to continue wanting to continue working this way and with this style of collaboration and devising theater, which led me to starting a theater company, Alana Ensemble, which is dedicated to using physical theater techniques to adapt or create devised pieces. And
award-winning theater ensemble, just to lift up the Stage Raw Award. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think one of the most fascinating things about this process and this way of working, which was introduced to us in the program by David Bridell, is allowing the cast and the company, a company of diverse actors coming from different backgrounds, international actors, people from different cultures and sexual orientations, and really, truly a diverse group of actors coming together and bringing in ideas and really investing in an exploration process. And it so organically brings unique ideas that are so beautifully and done, and it's so fascinating when it all comes together to me. And also in terms of people's unique skills. Someone is really good with poetry, the other person is great with comedy, something that someone sees as tragedy, the other person sees as comedy. And when they get a chance to improvise a scene or come up with ideas to stage a particular scene, they use those skills and they bring those ideas to the table. And that's so fascinating. And of course, over the course of a few months, people share these ideas and pick and choose between them. And David is in particular very brilliant in actually allowing all these voices to be heard and to be used, but at the same time support a cohesive vision. So when I saw this piece, I laughed, I cried, I was inspired. I saw a very unique style, which is innovative, surprising, and it is rooted in physical theater techniques. So it was really inspiring to me, and I'm really happy that we get a chance to share it with more people, because everyone in the community of USC were really rooting for this piece to have another life outside of school. And I think because it inspired me to continue working this way and using this process to create more works, I felt that it's appropriate for me to help produce it again and share it with more people.
Thank you so much. I also saw the original production, and it still reverberates in my bones to this day. It was quite profound to see that physical movement language.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about so much, really, truly daily at A Noise Within, is how do we ensure that the classics are as inclusive, equitable, and diverse as possible? And there are many ways we do that, and that is a multi-pronged conversation that we're not prepared to unpack right now. But one of the ways we do that is similar to what MK and Bali Stars has shared, really searching for what world classics and what different cultures can we bring to our stage. You know, I'm reminded of our first Noise Now year. We worked with Coin and Ghost Theater Company to present an adaptation of Mexican folklore that we called Pequeños Sueños. So that's one thing we're doing. And obviously, when we also want to make sure that when we're presenting Shakespeare, Chekhov, Euripides, et cetera, that we are the production, the artists, everyone behind the stage and on the stage are representative of Los Angeles, and that's something we prioritize as well. But then the third thing we're putting a lot of energy into is adapting classics that are not culturally specific, but then infusing them with a unique cultural lens. And that's certainly not the only way to engage in this conversation and to lean into EDI work in the classical canon or in the traditional curated classical canon. But that's what attracts me so much to all of your work. That being said, when there are so many amazing plays written by people of color and written for people of color, it raises the question, why revisit these stories right now? Yes, they're universal. Yes, they explore our shared humanity. But I'd love to shift to you, Carol, and talk about why this story, why Antony and Cleopatra today?
Well, some of the themes that I had mentioned before, the idea of what was interesting to me was this whole idea of how colonization has affected us globally. It's not something that maybe we would looking at this piece, but even kind of stepping back and thinking about what this piece was based on was a lot of Plutarch's histories, and to me, which also had a lot of propaganda in it. Especially the portrayal of Cleopatra, which is problematic to me, even in this Shakespearean in Shakespeare's piece, because she's this very emotional woman who's consumed by her senses and her impulses. So I really wanted to challenge that. I'm looking at ways of digging into that, because the historical Cleopatra at the time was governing over a country that was experiencing prosperity and peace for an extended period of time, since the Ptolemies came, since, of course, Rome came and occupied them. And I think we're looking at the idea of power and dynamics. And to me, my initial response was looking at it through the lens of the cocaine epidemic, and certainly what we're seeing now with opioids, and also unraveling the corruption of a lot of our political systems. I feel that's kind of an age-old story, with unchecked power. And so, but I think you also raise an interesting question, because the initial impulse came out in the midst of the crack cocaine epidemic, or kind of as it was peaking. And, looking back on it, I question myself, is this something that still has relevance? And if so, what is it? And how do I find that? Because I was having pressure of some people saying, well, you need to update the drug culture. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. The only difference is people who are addicted to opioids aren't criminalized, and aren't being incarcerated. So I think it's interesting to still have that discussion, to really point out the disparities of how different groups of people are treated differently depending on who's crafting that message. But also, I think it is important to look also around at who are our contemporary classical writers, certainly August Wilson. You can look at American Tennessee Williams. Uh, oh gosh, I'm thinking Alice Childress. You can look at African American, Latino writers. Certainly, a whole scope of writers that are worthy of investigation. And I've also gotten to a point in my life, kind of coming up in non-traditional casting, sometimes feeling like I was being inserted into a story that wasn't my own. And that has been uncomfortable, but I never had the space, or have been with a group of people, to be really able to talk about that, So it's, I find that really interesting.
And as artist, I'm a director also. Speaking for myself, I want to work, so I may not always function some things if I get an opportunity. So I recognize that.
And one more thing, if I might add, too, but I also think it's educating audiences, because I think, nonprofit theaters and commercial theaters, most certainly, you've got a subscriber base, you've got an audience you want to bring in. Well, who is the audience that we're speaking to? So you're not only talking, I think it's important not only to talk about diversity on stage and we as artists, but, the next challenge is how do you invite in the communities that we come from into those spaces and make them feel like they are a part of this community. So, and then I think you really have a vested interest in telling those stories. If you're trying to kind of slot us in, to, kind of show representation, to me, it's always felt disingenuous. And I think it's really important that we really need to say, like, okay, look at our structures and go, why can't we have a season that includes everyone all year round? Why do we have to kind of put us in the black box, or put us in, once a year, to kind of fulfill, I'm not saying that it's disingenuous, but I understand it's the reality of producing, who's coming into the spaces. So I think that's our next challenge as theater artists.
That's right. And these are, that resonates so deeply with me. And of course, these are not new challenges. These are challenges that have been around for decades and decades and decades and decades here. And they're challenges that I caught myself one day saying, oh, every theater is wrestling with this. And then a colleague said, no, Jonathan, no, there are theaters who are not wrestling with this. And there are theaters who are not wrestling this because they don't care about this. I know we all on this conversation really do care about this, and I recognize, as I do say that this is a multi-year, multi-decade workout to really shift the foundation on which we stand, so that everyone on stage, behind stage, in office, in board, really is reflective of the entire community. So that's a whole other panel as well. But I of course, I hope you can feel how passionate I am about that.
Feel free to invite me. So
yes, you are all invited. You are all, not only are you invited to the table, but we are clearing the table for you and asking you like how you want to build it. Okay, we're building the table together.
We ain't mad.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll mute.
I want to go back to her story. I want to ask the same question, why now? And it's sort of silly because, or not silly rather, but I'm reminded that this project, although you just taught me, Shivani, what the origin story of this really was, but I had thought it was because we were doing The Winter's Tale. And when we had to cancel The Winter's Tale because of COVID-19, I think I then came to you and said, okay, well, what project do you want to do now? And you said, Her Story. Said, oh, well, we're not doing the main stage. Okay. So why was that important to you, that we continue on this path to lift up this narrative?
One, I think Shalini and I are just very excited about this project, and it's something that we've invested our hearts into. And so I think part of it was that we wanted to see it through. We want to see it up on its feet. It's our baby. Part of it, I think, also just sort of when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, and one of the things that you mentioned is like when there's so many modern contemporary works that are representative of so many different cultures and communities right now, why go back to the classics? And I just wanted to drop in the fact that one thing that I've found is that when you're taking the classics, there's cultural references which are beautiful that we could share with audiences that may not be aware of, let's say, our Indian culture with the Ramayana. But the characters are not bound within that cultural reference, and that they portray a very strong human, universal appeal and universal experience in some sense. And I find that really fascinating, and I find that that's a great entry point when we're trying to introduce audiences to different stories and different cultures. Is there is something that everybody can relate to when you're dealing with the classics, just in terms of broadening pace and awareness and that type of thing. And I think with Her Story, one, Shalini and I talked about, do we want to do something new or do we want to continue with this? And we're like, we want to definitely, put this up on its feet. But I think also you had mentioned that the upcoming season is Spirits Rising. And thematically, that still ties with Her Story. I don't want to have a spoiler alert or anything like that, but there's this thing of Sita walking through a fire to prove her purity, and coming out on the other side pure. And I'm not going to give away any more, but it is an important point of our production as well. So yeah, and Shalini could continue with why. Yeah.
I think it was also, we've both been in the commercial space, and not just like for acting, but for Indian dance as well. Just because it felt like, with the times, you got to roll with the punches, do what the business can offer you. And I think that's what you touched on, Jonathan, was I literally almost called you JMP.
That's a nickname I've tried to get rid of for
I know.
Yeah.
Still in my head. You touched on was, we want work. Like that was kind of when I remember when I graduated college, it was such a seamless transition to going into TV and film, because it was just more opportunities and more work. And at that time, the world was changing, and they were not just looking for like the token Indian person, but they were actually offering roles, three-dimensional characters. And with theater, it did feel like we were inserting ourselves into a space that, that had been there for decades, and we couldn't really change it based off of what we were able to bring into it. So I think there was this natural progression of Indian classical dance for us has been rooted into that's our tradition, that's our culture, and it was a form of storytelling. So we always, even within the dance world, we tend to go back to our Indian roots and go back to classical. And that's kind of where our partnership even began, was through that. Like the first thing I've ever done with her in college was an Indian classical exhibit at LACMA. And it was this dance form that we were playing a chess game. So it just, for us, it was such a natural progression to bringing in to dance to theater, because in a way it was showing the theater world that this is, we are all the same. We have this cultural experience that's going parallel with each other. And there was something I saw this beautiful TED talk about by Melody Hobson. if anyone's seen it. It was recently, it's been coming up because with everything that's going on in the world currently. I've been thinking about my own life and how, how equity is really important, but not just equality. But specifically, she was talking about being color brave, not color blind. And I think with theater, when I've done theater when I was a kid or in college, I had those opportunities where people were being color brave and took my experience firsthand, not just because of my skin color, but because of what I was able to offer with my experience. And that's kind of what she talks about, is giving people a chance, not because they have the exact same experience that you're looking for, but maybe that they can offer a different point of view, and that can only elevate your work. So I think that way it just makes sense. I think what we're trying to do, why this makes sense to do it now, is that we're taking that exact point of view and putting it in a production.
I want to share that I've always, for a very long time, I've believed that theater is a tool for social change and social justice. And I still believe that. I feel very strongly about it. But I also recognize that not everyone does. And actually, having just come out of the multi-week-long theater communications group conference, that idea was really challenged, especially now with the world we're in. I question that. But I want to pivot to you, Elmira, and talk about Elan Ensemble and ask, do you feel that Trojan Women has a role in social justice, social change? And also, what is Elan Ensemble's role in that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this question. It's definitely a very important and complicated question, especially with what is going on in our world today. I'm constantly thinking, as a leader of a small theater company, what is my role and how I can contribute, and what stories are important to share, and how to do that. And of course, as you mentioned, there's no one way of doing it, and there's no right or wrong way. But what is inspiring to me about this piece in particular, first, is that we see a different way of looking at this piece with a non-traditional casting. Usually we've seen Trojan Women being produced in a different way, and we have some associations with how this play needs to be staged, but it really stretches our perspective and our expectations of what can be achieved by telling a classical story. And for that, I'm passionate about it. And personally, again, we all come into a collaboration process with our own experiences and background and baggage. And I'm from Iran, and the war between Iran and Iraq ended when I was 3 years old. But for decades, I saw the effects of war and saw people really living with this question of, what was the point of this? Like 8 years of destruction and loss, and what was it for, and who benefited from it, and what did we gain at the end, and like all of these things. And for me, Trojan Women is really an anti-war piece, and really shows the irrationality of war so beautifully. And it is really heartbreaking to see, even to this day. Like, I'm sure you know, the beginning of this year, there was this political tension between Iran and America, and there were talks about war and all of that. And it's just, you definitely see the roles of people in power and all of these themes that are repeated and repeated. And for me, it's really powerful when I revisit the classical plays, because it's kind of an important realization that these themes tend to repeat themselves. And in some cases, it's also a good affirmation to know, oh, we have come a long way in some areas, which is also important for me to be able to recognize and share that with an audience. But also, in some ways, we're still grappling with the same things and themes, and it's important to shine a light on them, I think.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful. I want to ask you all this question in our last 10 minutes together. not specific to adapting theater, but I can't help, as a colleague of yours and as a human who cares about all four of you, I wonder how the past 3 months have changed your relationship to theater, or what you think of theater, or how it's changed your own artistry. Any piece of that resonates with you, how has the past 3 months, which have included so much more than COVID-19, of course, how has that impacted you and your relationship to theater? And I don't mean, streaming, virtual, but on a deeper level. I'm just gonna, whatever comes to you, I'm gonna go to Shalini first. And there's no wrong answer. Just what resonates?
I have been wanting to go back to theater for a long time. So this project for me was like a dream come true, just to bring in my two sides of it. But the last 3 months, honestly, being in quarantine, everything's been like, what are ways we can make films or whatever on Zoom, and even plays. I saw a play recently on Zoom, and this last 3 months, I was really thinking about my personal identity as an Indian American woman, and how theater has shaped me since I was in 8th grade, and how it brought me out of a dark place, for reasons that have evolved now. So I think for me, the last 3 months, I've been going back to theater, but trying to see how I can stay true to my identity as an Indian American person and bring in my experience. So I think what I've reiterated before was that's why I mentioned Melody Hobson, is feeling like I can bring in my experience authentically to a production. And so I actually have been researching a lot of Indian American playwrights the last 2 months, and I found this database, which is like hundreds of Indian American playwrights. So I've just been downloading those and reading those. But I'm trying to see now. I feel like I think my eyes open to going, wait, these should be productions. These should be read, like play readings, whatever it is, just to shed light to that there are these storytellers out here for years. That's the thing. Some of these people are like in their 50s, and it's just they've been under the radar for so long just because of what theater is meant to most people. But I think with everything that's going on, there's been a lot of posts that's been happening too. Like our writer, actually, Pallavi Srinivasan, wrote this emotional post on Facebook about how USC was amazing for so many ways, but it did feel very centric to the white culture, and anyone who was a minority never felt safe to audition for something because you knew you were being cast. You either thought you were being cast because you were you were being tokenized, or you had to be grateful that you were even part of the show. And it was this, and that's her. Then she graduated like a few years ago, and that's not that long ago. And I can't even imagine what Shivani went through when she was in college, and even personally for me, which is why I went into independent theater more than doing the actual school production. So I think for me, it was the last 3 months. I've been like, this needs to shake up. We need to change this. And for people who are, who care and so deeply about this, and people of color, I think it's time. I just genuinely think for me, it was like, it's time.
Yes, I'm giving a standing ovation. Absolutely. And when we all went into quarantine, I heard all the time, I can't wait to get back to business, right? But now we're recognizing how problematic that wish is, because now we're hearing more and more, I hope things don't return to how they were, because this is a real opportunity to start anew and to really lead with our guiding principles that we say we have. So thank you for that, Shalini. Carol, I wanna know how you're thinking or feeling about this.
I've honestly been grieving a lot. I was actually also relieved to have the downtime. I had just come off of doing Billie Holiday, which was a really taxing production, as well as just kind of this snowball of work towards the end of the year and voiceover stuff. And so I was just like, okay, good. I can kind of collapse, which I did. I got ill for about 2 months, and still kind of coming out of it, but also, and with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these things coming up, and just really, it was also the tsunami of things of being a Black woman in theater as an artist and reflecting on these experiences and knowing how many times I want to cry because I'm thinking of the times that I sacrificed my own voice just to fit in and just to kind of keep getting up and doing the work. And I think, like you said, Jonathan, and everyone else has also expressed the opportunity to reflect and say, how are we going to move forward, and what type of intentionality are we going to move forward in these spaces, and how are we going to change? And hopefully we will have a space to come back to, but maybe we do need this extended period of time as this necessary reset for all of us to reflect on what we really value and think about how we're putting our work and our voices and our hearts and minds and souls out in the world. I think that's why we all become artists, because we want to see ourselves reflected back. We want to see other people. We want to see ourselves. We want to see our collective humanity and know that none of us are alone. So,
Thank you so much. Elmira, what's changed for you?
I also, like many others, started the quarantine really missing this community, and wanting to go back. But then as other things happened, I was all of a sudden very disappointed and felt like we are not really being as responsible as we should be as artists, because there's such power in what we do, and that's why we miss it so much. And there's so many wonderful human beings in this community, and they constantly observe themselves, observe human beings, and they believe in becoming a better human being day after day. That's what an artist is to me, and why we are not, why we haven't done the work to be in a better place today and represent the truth of what it is to live in Los Angeles and in this world and in this society. So I've been having mixed feelings about our community and, our responsibility and what we need to do, because really it seems like it's way overdue, and why haven't we done anything years ago? So, and I keep getting reminded in different conversations and in different scenarios that how important it is to have representations in leadership positions, representations of different communities and with different perspectives, with different experience in leadership positions, to just naturally create a more balanced world and community for us. So yeah, that's been me.
Thank you so much, Elmira. Giovanni, what's changed for you?
So a lot of things in the last 3 months, a lot of different emotions. To begin with, I think the value of theater, and in the sense of like, we've always appreciated that live collective experience. But I've felt it even heightened with everything that's going on, because I've felt a tremendous collective grief for everything that's happened, and a deeper connection to humanity, and deeper empathy, and self-awareness. I've become acutely aware of how excessive our lifestyle is, how surface our lifestyle is, and how much, especially I think being in a city with LA, like LA, that's so fast-paced, has such a strong commercial influence, how we're always kind of creating work, yes, with this purpose of making a statement or saying something important to us, but also with this idea of we have to keep up. And we have to keep running the race in some sense. And I think having this perspective of being quiet and taking a step back and seeing humanity and seeing that collective experience has really made me become a lot more self-aware, and feel as an artist that going forth, it's vital that we move forward with that self-awareness, but also with intentionality and creating work with a purpose and being purposeful in our choices. And I think that goes, I felt that in all areas of my life of how am I investing my time and what am I focusing my resources and energy and heart towards? And how can I use it to continue this connection that I've discovered in a very negative space in some sense. You know, it's through grief that I feel connected, but how can I connect that in a positive way and continue that depth of connection with humanity? And I definitely think that theater offers that experience. And I mean, even in my time right now, like obviously I'm, you know, binge watching and reading a lot and all of this, but I've been also watching there have been live stream shows from archives of different theaters, and seeing those staged works just gives me a different sense of soul satisfaction. And recently I saw a show that I'd actually seen live 2 years ago, and then I saw it streamed, and it was really eye-opening to see that, yes, I appreciate it in the streamed media, but recalling how it was sitting in the audience, feeling the emotional reactions with my fellow humans next to me, breathing in at the same time, reacting, laughing, crying at those same moments. And there's something very powerful about that. And I think we're all doing it virtually right now, in terms of reacting to what's going on in our society, because it's so big and it's so important. And I definitely am, you know, feeling a lot of the things that Carol said of it's a necessary reset and it's a necessary reevaluation of our intentions, our priorities, and where we want to go forward.
Thank you so much. I want to lift up this phrase you used, soul satisfaction. I love that, soul satisfaction. My soul is so beyond satisfied being here, sharing space with you all. I'm so nourished by each of you, by the work you create. Cannot wait to see your work again. I have chills now thinking about it. It's such a gift to have this time with you all and to share your work with our audiences. So thanks to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Love you.
Love you all too. I want to let our viewers know that we'll be back here again on Friday, June 26th for a Q&A with the Alice in Wonderland cast. We invite you back to join us then. But of course, we cannot wait to be in a theater with you all again. So we'll do our best to connect in the meantime. Be well. We miss you. We thank you. Stay safe. Bye now.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.